Welcome back, fellow shop rats. It's a Sunday afternoon out here in the shop, and I've just been pushing the walls back after our major construction project that we had a few episodes ago. If you can see over there, you'll notice I've not made any further progress because, well, just time and other things going on in life. But today, I had recently run across a bunch of questions about how to winterize your classic car for storage. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of good information. And the decisions on how to do that are totally up to you. But, I'm going to give you my opinion. And with about $5, in my opinion, you can get a gallon of gas and you'll still be stuck with my opinion. I'm Mike.
This is My Car's Shop.
I think that there are some absolutes when it comes to winter car storage. And, we're in the middle of October right now. And by the time you see this, it's going to be the middle of November. And I do need to go around the property and the other buildings and make sure that all the cars are ready for winter. But today I just wanted to talk a little bit about it. One of the questions that I recently ran across on a forum was, do I need to drain the gas tank on my classic car before I store the car for the winter? Now, my answer to that is you don't need to. However, I would make a suggestion, and that is make sure that you don't have any alcohol based fuels in that fuel system if at all possible. Now, like on my GTS that runs racing fuel, that's kind of just a given in that car because there's a lot of alcohol in the fuel that I run in that, and to get rid of that fuel would be pretty much impossible because it won't run on anything under 104 octane. Well, it will, but it runs really crappy. So for me to, run that car and get some rec fuel in there at 93 octane, it would not be good. So that car I just put up with every few years, knowing I'm probably going to have some carburetor work on it because the seals are going to dry out from the alcohol in the fuel. But on my other cars, usually I run, like on Scoops, for example, I run a higher octane fuel all summer, but I don't always run rec fuel. The reason is because rec fuel is quite expensive. And if you don't live in an area where they sell rec fuel, sometimes it's just called real gas or no alcohol gas or something like pure gas, something like that. But alcohol tends to attack and destroy a lot of the seals in the carburetor if the fuel system and the carburetor are not designed for alcohol based fuels. Now, I'm not talking about 100% alcohol, but I am saying that fuels that have, like 10% or more of alcohol in them, they will attack. And so I would suggest that, like, what I do is through the summer, I'll run just regular, pump premium 93 octane. And then about this time of year, as I'm driving it before I put it away for the winter, I will start putting rec fuel in it for the last couple tankfuls and run that through it. So I know next spring when I fire that car up, it's not gonna have carburetor problems because the alcohol wasn't sitting in there
Eating away at it all winter.
I know that some people like to put fuel stabilizers in their gas tanks, and that's fine. I don't particularly use that. I just stick with the non-alcohol fuels this time of year, and that takes care of all of that. But you certainly can use that as well. Now, other questions that or other things that I think are very important is obviously, especially if you live in the northern part of the country, make sure that you've tested your antifreeze. And I suggest making sure that your antifreeze is good to 10, 20, maybe even 30 below zero. And that's going to have a lot to do with the ratio of antifreeze and water, unless you buy it pre-mixed, which I think is a waste of money, but it is easier. But I like to buy 1 gallon and just use an empty gallon jug, half and half it, and then top them both off with water. And that usually gets me pretty close to where I want to be for the winter. Make sure you've got a good hygrometer so that you can test that to see where that temperature is. Check it both cold and hot if you can, but if you do take your radiator cap off when the engine is hot, obviously be super, super careful because the system could be under pressure and you could get burned. Other question that people will ask is, should I jack my car up and put it on jack stands so the tire's not sitting flat on the floor? Yes, you can do that. I've never worried about doing that, usually because the cars don't sit in one place long enough anyway. But even cars over in the other garage, like the 69 Charger and the 47 Ford, they sit for months on end. And it's never been an issue with flat spots on the tires on those cars at all. The only car that I do have some issues with flat spots is the 68 Pro Street Dart GTS. That has 18.5-inch wide Mickey Thompsons on the back, 31-inch tall. And those tires, like drag slicks, do tend to take a flat spot if it sits for any length of time. I've always found that in the spring, I drive it down the road and I can feel the back end doing this. And I usually stop, slam the brake on real hard once I'm stopped, push the little red button on my shifter, and then floor it in first gear and then pull it into second gear and do that for 5, 10, 15 seconds and then let the button off and continue on down the road until the tires stop spinning, lather, rinse, and repeat, usually doing that twice. A couple of massive big smoky burnouts and those flat spots are gone. That's my cure for the flat spots. But if you want to jack the car up and put it on jack stands, by all means, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just not something that I take the time to do. The biggest battle that I fight here out in the country, particularly in this old barn and in the garage, is animals, particularly mice and rats getting in the car and just playing hell with things getting up above the headliner, eating holes through the headliner on top of the sun visors, peeing all over everything, packing the interior full of nuts, berries, and whatever else they can, and just building nests in the cars. I've got some ways that I deal with that. It's not perfect, but it's the ways that I have found to deal with it. The first thing I will use is the Grandpa Gus. It is a spice pack that has a bunch of cinnamon and other spices in it. And you're supposed to like put one for so many square feet, and one per car is plenty. I usually put 2 or 3 in a car. I also use baited glue traps. You can get those at Wally World or somewhere else. And I use the rat traps, the large rodent traps are about this big. They're baited so that it attracts the critters, and then they get in there and they stick to it. The thing with those is when it's cold, it's no big deal. But as the weather starts to warm up, if you don't pay attention to how many mice can be on there, and I usually try to check those every couple of weeks, it can really start to stink because they do decay. Another question that people will ask is about, is there anything else like the oil or anything that we should do anything with? And I would say make sure that your oil is fairly clean. Make sure that it's not got a lot of contaminants in it from high mileage, because that can be acidic and that can cause corrosions. Make sure there's no moisture in that oil. I generally don't change my oil before I put it away, and I often don't change it when I take the car out in the spring, as long as I know how many miles is on it and about how much time is on that oil as well. I don't worry too much about it. But my biggest concerns are, is it dirty? Then I know I need to change it. Does it have any moisture in it? Then I also know that I need to change it. Remember, moisture in your oil is because you're probably not getting that engine up to operating temperature long enough, or it's not getting hot enough. We had a episode on this a while ago where we talked about the mistakes people make about running really cold thermostats, trying to keep their engine down around 150 and 160 degrees. And that's a big mistake, because if your engine doesn't get up around 190 to 195, even up to 200, you're not steaming all of that moisture out of the oil, and it starts to collect in there, and you'll get creamy oil sometimes, or you'll pull your dipstick out and there's like a creamy oily residue on the dipstick. And it's a common mistake. People think that, oh, I need to keep that temperature way down. No, you don't. You need to keep that temperature manageable, and you need to decide where that temperature is. But you really want to keep that oil temperature up, which means your cooling system needs to be hotter so that you can burn and boil off those contaminants in the oil to help keep the oil pure and clean. I think the final and most important thing in any car, whether it's a car you're storing or a car that you're driving, is make sure that you change out the air in your tires from summer air to winter air, because that's extremely important. And if you have any questions, be sure to go to your local tire shop or your local mechanic and ask them questions about that. Changing out your winter air for your summer air in the spring and changing out your summer air for your winter air in the fall is extremely important for car storage.
I also have some swampland in Florida I'm going to sell you if you bought that.
I'm kidding.
Another thing to consider is where you're going to be storing your car and for how long. One of the worst places you can store a car is on cement, because cement emits moisture. So make sure that if you're storing it on cement, that you do have some air circulation around in there occasionally, at least. It doesn't need to be all the time. Make sure you're not in a building, excuse me, make sure you're not in a building that's going to be doing a lot of sweating with temperature changes, because again, all that moisture will gather under the car. If you're going to be keeping a car on a cement floor for a long time, something I suggest is you can either just lay down a vapor barrier. You can buy a great big roll. I think I've got one back there against the wall. You probably can't see, not for that purpose, but what do they call that stuff? It's what you put on the side of a building when you're siding it before you put on your siding and so forth. So put that barrier on the floor and put your car on that, or even better, what I know where the Oakland was stored for 20 years after it was moved out of the original garage, my aunt had just laid a bunch of hardwood flooring on the floor under the car. And that really can make a difference, because that wood then becomes the barrier to deal with that moisture as it comes and goes, rather than it getting up on the car and causing rust. I can't think of anything else right offhand. We dealt with the cooling system, the oiling system, the tires. We dealt with the special air that you need. Talked about whether to put it on stands or not. Um, I think for the changing out the fuel, making sure you use the fuel. I think that pretty much covers what I do. I don't get too whipped up about it. Yeah, sometimes the cars even do sit for a couple of years, but I've never really had major issues. The other thing that I will mention, I've done this, is if you have chrome on your engine, I know it's kind of a pain. But you might consider either just putting wax, like car wax, on the chrome to keep that from rusting, or maybe take something like PB Blaster and spray it, or WD-40 or something like that, just because especially cheap chrome rusts really easy. And if there's a raindrop within 10 miles, it seems like all of a sudden things will start to rust. Something else I would suggest, disconnect your battery when the car's parked. It's such a habit for me because I never leave an old car parked anywhere at any time, except maybe at the store, with the battery connected. Trust the wiring? I do not. I never want a battery connected when I'm not driving the car. I also keep a good chemical electrical fire extinguisher in all my cars. But anyway, make sure you disconnect the battery. You can use a battery tender if you want, but where I was going with all of that is, it is a good idea to fire the car up once in a while throughout the winter. Remember, if you're going to do that, don't leave the car unattended. There's a story my dad tells of somebody that he knows who started up their classic car, and they went did some other things and got distracted and looked over, and lo and behold, the garage was on fire because something went wrong with the car. There was a fuel leak, something, and it caught on fire, and they weren't there watching it to deal with it. And they lost the garage, they lost the car, and a bunch of other things because of that. So never leave your car running unattended, especially when it's in a garage. I think that'll do it. Thanks for watching. Drop in the comments down there your thoughts on winter car storage. And I would say, even if you live in the South, some of these things still apply to you. Don't expect that you're not going to have some below zero weather, and you may need to pay attention, particularly to that antifreeze. All right, that'll do it for this one. Like, share, and subscribe. Drop your comments, and we will see you on the next one. You didn't think I forgot, did you? It is the most important thing around here, because without it, I'm just not sure that life's worth living.
Rock!